I have been keeping the gate logs on Coldreach for 61 cycles. That is a long time on a moon that nobody chooses to come to. You learn the weather. You learn the sound the wind makes when it is only cold, and the different sound it makes when it has teeth. And you learn the people, which is a sadder thing to learn, because most of what you learn about people out here is what they will do when they think no one is watching. I am going to tell you about a night 3 winters back. I have told it before to traders who stop for fuel, and they always go quiet near the end. I think you will too. It is the night a child was carried out to die. And it is the night a human walked into the dark to bring her back. Stay with me. You have to understand where we are first, or none of it lands the way it should. Coldreach is not a city. It is barely a station. It started as a deep-shaft mining outpost for ferrolite, which is a heavy ore the foundry worlds pay well for, and around the shaft head grew the usual crust of living that grows wherever there is money in the ground. Habitat domes, a cargo ramp, a med shed with 1 tired surgeon, 2 drinking houses, a market under a patched canopy that snaps all night in the wind, and a gate, which is mine, where I sit and watch who comes and who goes. The moon we sit on is called Hesk. It turns slow. The dark lasts 9 of your standard days at a stretch, and during that long dark the temperature outside the domes drops to a number I will not bother saying, because it is just a number until it is on your skin, and then it is the only number there is. The ground is gray. The snow is not water snow. It is ammonia ice, fine as powder, and it does not fall so much as it crawls sideways on the wind and packs into every seam and joint until the whole outpost groans like something old trying to stand up. At night you can hear 3 things always. The wind. The generators, 2 of them, neither of them young, humming a note just slightly out of tune with each other so the air never feels still. And the shaft. The deep shaft never stops. Even when the crews are sleeping, the ore haulers run, and somewhere far under your feet there is a sound like a giant breathing through a wet throat. You stop hearing it after a while. Then a stranger comes and asks what that sound is, and you realize you have been hearing it for 61 cycles. The people who work the shaft are mostly Korlu. I am not Korlu. I will not tell you what I am. It does not matter. I am just the old thing at the gate. But I have lived among the Korlu long enough to know them, and I am going to be honest about them, which is hard, because I came to care about one of them more than I expected to, and you do not like to speak ill of a people once you love one of them. The Korlu are a strong folk, broad in the shoulder, low to the ground, with a hide like wet slate that hardens when they are cold so they can work the surface longer than anyone. They are good miners. They are loyal to their kin to a degree that other species find frightening, and they are right to find it frightening, because Korlu loyalty is not soft. It is not the loyalty of love. It is the loyalty of the herd that knows it survives only if it does not carry weight it cannot carry. And so the Korlu have a custom. They call it the severing. I will tell it to you plain because the Korlu tell it to you plain. They are not ashamed of it. That is the part that took me longest to understand. When a Korlu is born wrong, or grows wrong, or becomes wrong, when sickness takes the strength out of a limb, when the slate hide will not harden, when a young one cannot pull a full load and never will the kin gather. There is no anger in it. There is barely even sorrow, not the kind you would show. The elders look at the one who is wrong and they say a word that means, more or less, unfit to be carried. And once that word is said, it cannot be unsaid. The wrong one is no longer kin. They are not given a name anymore. They are not given a place at the warm wall. And on the next long dark, when the cold comes down hardest, they are walked out past the perimeter lights and they are left. Not killed. The Korlu would tell you they would never kill kin. They simply stop. They simply leave the wrong one where the cold can do what the kin will not. They walk back inside. They seal the door. And in the morning, or in the morning 9 days later, the cold has done its work, and the kin do not speak of it again. Nobody on Coldreach interferes. That is the law of the place, unwritten but absolute. The Korlu do not interfere with another family's severing, and the rest of us, the traders, the foundry agents, the off-world drifters, we mind our own. The Concord ships that come through, the regional authority that wears the silver and carries the long rifles and calls itself peacekeepers, they do not interfere either. They have a phrase for it. Internal kinship matter. Means, not our problem. Means, do not make it our problem. I had watched 4 severings in 61 cycles. I am ashamed to tell you I watched them the way you watch weather, from inside, through glass. The 5th one was Kessa. I knew Kessa before she was wrong. That is what makes it stay with me. She was small for a Korlu youngling, but quick, with eyes the color of the cheap orange lamps we hang at the market, a kind of warm, dirty gold. She used to run messages between the shaft office and the cargo ramp when she was barely up to my waist, because the foreman would pay a half token to anyone who could carry word faster than the comm relay, and the comm relay broke roughly every other day. She was the fastest. She would come skidding into my gate booth out of breath, slate-hide flushed dark, and demand to know if anything interesting had come in on the haulers, and I would lie and tell her something had, just to watch her try to decide whether to believe me. She had no mother that I ever saw. Korlu kinship is not parents the way you would think of it. She belonged to a kin line, a broad family of cousins and elders under an old matriarch named Drudd, who was as hard a creature as the moon she stood on. Kessa belonged to them the way a tool belongs to a workshop. Useful, therefore kept. She started to go wrong in her 14th or 15th season. I do not know the Korlu word for what it was. The medshed surgeon, a stooped old off-worlder named Petrine who had seen everything twice, said it was a wasting in the nerves. It started in her left hand. She would reach for something and the hand would not close the way she told it to. Then it was the leg. She started to walk with a hitch, then with a stick, then she stopped running messages, because a Korlu who cannot carry a load is a Korlu the foreman has no half-tokens for. I watched it happen across 2 winters. I watched her get quieter. I watched the other younglings stop, including her, not cruelly, just the way water flows around a rock. And I watched old Drudd start to look at her with that flat, weighing look, the look that is not anger and is not grief, the look that is just arithmetic. I knew what was coming. Everyone did. There is no surprise in a severing. The whole outpost knows for weeks before, the way you can feel a storm in your joints. The only thing nobody knew was which long dark it would be. It was the long dark of the 3rd winter. The cold came down that night harder than I had felt it in years. The generators hit that thin screaming note they hit when the load is heavy, and the wind out past the perimeter was doing the thing where it sounds like voices, like a crowd very far away all talking at once, which is just ammonia ice over rock, but you never quite believe that at the time. I saw them go past my booth a little after the 2nd shift bell. 4 of them. Drudd at the front and 2 of the broad cousins, and between them Kessa, walking on her stick, her hood down so the cold could already find her, because once the word is said you are not given the dignity of a hood. She looked at me as they passed the glass. I want to tell you I did something. I did not. I looked back at her and I lifted my hand, just a little off the desk, and she looked at it, and then they walked her out through the perimeter gate and into the dark, and the door sealed behind them with that long hydraulic sigh it makes, and I sat there with my hand half lifted off the desk like a fool. The 3 of them came back maybe 20 minutes later. 3 went out with her, 3 came back without. They did not look at me. Drudd's face was the same flat slate it always was. They went back inside the warm dome and the door sealed, and that was the end of it. That was always the end of it. Except that night a hauler had come in late off the long run from the Foundry Worlds, and on that hauler, riding back as freight class passage because it is cheaper than a berth, was a human. We did not get many humans on Coldreach. Back then, humans were still new to this whole arm of the sector. They had come spilling out of their corner of space maybe 2 generations before, and the older species were still deciding what to make of them. You heard things. You always hear things about a new people. What you heard about humans, mostly, was that they were difficult. Not strong, Plenty of species are strong. Not clever exactly, though they were that too. Difficult. The word the traders used was difficult, and they said it with a particular face. Humans did not let things go. Humans had a way of deciding a thing was wrong and then simply not accepting that it had to be that way, the way the rest of us accept that the cold is cold and the law is the law and the moon turns slow. There were stories. A human who would not stop digging into a labor contract until a whole indenture ring on 3 worlds came apart. A human medic who walked into a quarantine that everyone with sense had walked away from. They were not always right, the difficult humans. Sometimes they got themselves killed being difficult. But they had this reputation, see, this thing that hung around them, that you could not be sure a human would do the sensible thing, and that uncertainty made people careful around them. The one on the hauler that night was named Eli Mercer. I logged him in myself. That is how I have his name. He was a contract tech, atmosphere systems, come to fix the number 2 generator and recalibrate the dome scrubbers, the kind of work that brings a person to a place like Coldreach and the only kind. He was not young and not old. Lean, the way humans get lean, with a face that had been out in too much weather. He had a kit bag over one shoulder, and a thermal coat that had seen real use, and a way of looking around a room slow, taking it in, like a man counting exits out of habit. He stopped at my booth to log his contract chit, and he looked tired, and the first thing he ever said to me was to ask whether there was anywhere on this rock a man could get something hot to drink that would not strip the lining off his stomach. I told him the East Drinking House and to avoid the green bottle. He thanked me. He had good manners, which surprised me, because difficult is not usually polite. He went off toward the domes. He was not even supposed to be near the perimeter gate. He had no reason to be. His work was all inside. But here is the thing about the generators on Coldreach. The number 2 unit, the one he had come to fix, drew its intake from a vent stack out past the inner ring, near the perimeter, and a careful tech wants to lay eyes on the intake before he tears into the core, because half the time the problem is not the core at all. It is a stack choked with ammonia ice that nobody has cleared in a season. So sometime in the dead middle of that long dark, while the rest of us slept or drank or sat at our gates, Eli Mercer suited up and went out the maintenance lock to look at a vent stack. And out past the inner ring, in the wind that sounds like a far-off crowd, half buried already in the crawling ice, he found a Korlu youngling who was still, just barely, alive. I got the rest of it from him later in pieces across the days that followed, when he would come and sit in my booth because mine was the only face on Coldreach that did not go cold when it saw him. So when I tell you what happened out there, understand it is a man's account, given quiet, not a thing I watched through glass. For once I was not watching through glass. I wish I had a better excuse for that than that I was asleep. He said the first thing he saw was the stick. Her walking stick. She had not let go of it. It was standing up out of the ice at an angle, and he said for a moment his tired brain told him it was just a survey marker, the kind they plant, and he almost walked past it. Then he saw the shape at the base of it. She had stopped trying to walk a while back. She had curled down against the lee of a rock spur, the way anything cold-blooded or warm-blooded does at the end, trying to keep the last of the heat in the middle of itself. The crawling ice had built a little ridge against her windward side. Her eyes, those dirty gold lamp-colored eyes, were open, but barely, and the slate hide that should harden in the cold had gone past hard into a kind of gray that Eli said he did not like the look of even though he did not know the species. Because there is a gray that living things turn that you recognize in your gut no matter what world you are from. He told me he stood there for what he thinks was about 3 seconds. He said he knew, even in those 3 seconds, that he was somewhere he should not be, doing something that was not his to do. He was a contract tech on a foreign rock. He did not know the customs. He had seen the Korlu around the domes and understood enough to know they were a hard folk with their own ways. And some part of him, the sensible part, the part the rest of us listened to, told him very clearly, This is an internal kinship matter. This is the kind of thing that gets an off-worlder expelled or worse. You do not know what is happening here. Walk back to your vent stack and do your job and do not see this. And he said, and this is the part the traders go quiet at, so I will give it to you the way he gave it to me. He said, I heard all that, and then I thought she's looking right at me. And once she's looked at you, you can't unknow that she's there. So that part of the argument was already lost. He knelt down in the ammonia ice next to a dying child of a people he did not know, on a moon he did not care about, and he started doing the difficult thing. He could not carry her far in the open, not in that cold, not fast enough. So he did the only thing a tech can do, which is solve the problem in front of him with what is in front of him. He had his suit, and he had his thermal coat over the suit because the suit alone is not enough out there in the long dark, and he got the coat off himself and around her, and he told me his hands stopped working properly inside of a minute, that human hands do not like that cold any better than anything else, and he had to do the seals by feel and by swearing. He got her against the lee of the rock with himself between her and the wind, and he keyed his suit calm, and he started calling for the med lock. Nobody answered. He called again. He told me he could hear his own breath going ragged in the helmet. He cycled to the open band, the all-station emergency band, the one that is supposed to override everything, and he said it plain. Tech down at the number 2 intake, casualty, need a med team and a heated transport at the perimeter, respond. And the comm crackled and a Korlu voice came back, calm, flat. He did not know whose. He learned later it was one of the night wardens kin to Drudd's line. The voice said, there is no casualty. There is a severing. Return to your work, off-worlder. This is a kinship matter and is not yours. He told me he sat there with that voice in his ear, and the cold coming up through his knees and the child breathing in little broken pulls against his chest. And he understood all at once exactly what kind of place he had landed on, and exactly what the law of that place was, and exactly how alone he was on it. And then he keyed the comm again and he said, and I have thought about this many times, because it is such a small thing and such a large thing, he said. I hear you. I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you where I am and what I've got. You can send a transport or I'll carry her in over my shoulder, but she is coming inside. Mercer out. And he picked her up. I was woken by the med lock alarm. It is a sound I have heard maybe a dozen times in 61 cycles. A shaft accident, a pressure burn, a fool who drank the green bottle, and it always means run. So I ran, old as I am, down the dome corridor toward the med shed, and I came around the last bend and I stopped, because the corridor outside Petrine's med shed was full. Word travels on Coldreach faster than the broken comm relay ever did. The human had come in through the maintenance lock with a severed Korlu over his shoulder, and by the time I got there, the whole night side of the outpost was awake and crowding the corridor, and there was a wall of Korlu between the human and the med shed door. Not a violent wall. The Korlu do not need to be violent. They were just standing there. Drudd was at the front and the broad cousins and the night warden, and behind them more of the kin line, slate hide gone dark, and they were not letting the human past. Eli Mercer was standing in the middle of the corridor with the child still in his arms, his thermal coat wrapped around her, his suit frosted over and dripping as it warmed, his bare face red and cracked from the cold. And old Petrine, the surgeon, was hovering at the edge of it all with her med kit clutched to her chest, not daring to step into the gap, because for a surgeon to treat a severed one is to take a side, and out here you do not take a side. And Drudd said, in the trade tongue so the human would understand it, put her down. I will tell you, the way she said it raised the hair on me. There was no heat in it. It was the voice of someone reciting a fact of the universe. Put her down the way you would say, the moon turns, the cold is cold. She is no longer of my kin, Drudd said. She has been severed. She has no name. The word has been spoken and it cannot be unspoken. You have taken a thing that has been given to the dark off-worlder and you will put it back. And Eli Mercer, with his arms shaking now from the cold and the weight, looked at this old matriarch and at the wall of her kin, and at the whole crowded corridor of faces watching to see what the difficult human would do, and he said, "No, I have to stop here and tell you about that no, because I was there for it, and I have never forgotten the shape of it. It was not a brave no. He did not say it like a hero in a tale. His voice cracked on it, partly from the cold. He said it the way a tired man says a thing he has already decided and is too worn out to dress up. He said no the way you put down a weight. And then, because the Korlu were all just looking at him, he seemed to feel he had to explain himself, and what he said next was not clever and was not a speech. It was just a man saying what was true to him. He said, "Look, I don't know your laws, maybe I'm breaking one. You can put that on my contract, you can fine me, you can throw me off this rock when I've fixed your generator, that's all fine. But I'm not going to set a living kid down in the snow because a custom told me to. I can't, it's not in me. Where I'm from you don't do that. You don't walk away from someone who's still looking at you." He shifted her weight in his arms. "She's still looking at me, so no." The corridor was very quiet. Even the generators seemed quiet. Drudd looked at him for a long moment. And then she said the thing that, to her, settled the whole matter, the thing she truly believed. And I do not think she said it to be cruel, I think she said it because to her it was mercy. "You do not understand what you are doing. You think you are saving her. There is no place for her. She cannot pull a load. She cannot harden in the cold. She will live now as a thing that is carried, a weight on whoever is soft enough to carry her, and she will know every day that she is a weight, and that is a crueler dark than the one outside. We do not sever to be cruel, off-worlder. We sever so that none must live as a weight. You are not giving her life. You are giving her shame." And I watched Eli Mercer take that in. I watched it land on him, because it was not a stupid thing she said. It was a hard, true thing from inside a hard, true world, and he was honest enough to feel the weight of it. And then he said the second thing I have never forgotten. He said it quiet, almost gentle, looking down at the child in his arms and not at Drudd at all. He said, "Yeah, we carry weight where I'm from. That's kind of the whole point of us." It might have ended there. The Korlu do not fight off-worlders lightly. It brings the Concord down on a contract station, and the Concord shuts down or flow when it is annoyed, and or flow is everyone's wage. Drudd might have let the difficult human have his way and counted the child as already dead, already severed, no longer her concern. The kin do not chase what they have given to the dark. It might have ended there in the corridor, with the human carrying her past the wall and old Petrain finally daring to open her med shed door. But the night warden had not only called the human on the comm. He had also, the moment the human refused the first time out at the intake, sent word up the relay to the Concord cutter that was parked in high orbit over Hesk for its monthly fuel and customs stop. He had reported, in the careful flat language the Korlu use, that an off-worlder was interfering in a lawful internal kinship matter and was refusing the instruction of a kin elder. And the Concord, you understand, does not care about a dying child. Not one way or the other. What the Concord cares about is order. What it cares about is that a registered foreign contractor was refusing a lawful local instruction on a station under Concord customs jurisdiction, because that is the kind of small thing that becomes a large thing, the kind of precedent that, left alone, has off-worlders all over the sector deciding which local laws they will and will not follow. So while Eli Mercer stood in that corridor having his quiet, stubborn argument with an old matriarch, a customs shuttle was already dropping from the cutter through the long dark toward Coldreach's cargo ramp. And in it were 6 of them, silver hardshell, long rifles slung. The Concord peacekeepers, who are very polite and very calm and have never once in the history of the sector been turned aside by a polite, calm argument, because being turned aside is the one thing they are built not to be. I heard the shuttle come down. You always hear it, that flat, heavy whine over the wind. I remember turning toward the sound, and I remember the cold feeling that went through me, the feeling you get when a thing that was bad is about to become much worse. I looked back at the human. He had not heard it yet, or had not understood it. He was still standing there in the warming corridor with the child breathing against his chest, having just won his small, impossible argument, his face open with the relief of a man who thinks the hard part is behind him. It was not behind him. It was about to come through the cargo lock in silver hardshell with 6 long rifles, and it was going to ask him, very politely, to hand her over. And I was about to find out, along with the rest of Coldreach, exactly what one tired human would do when an entire galaxy's idea of order stood between him and a child he had carried in out of the dark. The cargo lock opened, and the cold came in ahead of them. That is the thing about the Concord shuttle. It docks at the outer cargo ramp, not the warm domes, and when the lock cycles you get a breath of the long dark push down the corridor ahead of the silver hardshell, so you smell them before you see them, that flat mineral smell of outside air, ammonia and rock and machine. By the time I saw the first of them step through, half the corridor had already turned toward the cold like flowers turning the wrong way. 6 of them. I had said 6, and I will say it again because the number matters. 6 is not a patrol. 6 is a statement. They came up the corridor in that unhurried way the peacekeepers have, the way that tells you they have never once had to hurry, helmets sealed, long rifles slung but slung loose, slung in the way that means they could be unslung between one breath and the next. Their hardshell was the gray silver that does not take a mark. You could not see their faces. That is on purpose. You are not meant to argue with a face. You are meant to argue with the Concord, and the Concord does not have a face. The one in front had a band of pale blue across the shoulder. An officer. He stopped a few paces from Eli Mercer, and the corridor went so quiet I could hear the child breathing. Little broken pulls, slower now, but there. She was alive. Petrine the surgeon had not been allowed to touch her yet, but she was alive, and you could hear it, and I think everyone in that corridor was listening to it the way you listen to a thing you are afraid will stop. The officer's voice came out filtered and flat through the helmet, in the trade tongue, very polite. Contractor Mercer, Atmosphere Systems, registered out of the Foundry Consortium. Is that correct? It was not really a question. Eli said yes anyway. His voice was steadier now. The warmth of the corridor had got into him and the shaking had mostly stopped, though his hands were still bad. I could see the cracked red of them where they came out of the suit cuffs, holding the bundle. You were instructed by a kin elder of this station to return a severed individual to the place of severing, the officer said. You refused. You were instructed by station wardens over the open band to cease interference in an internal kinship matter. You refused. Do you dispute either of these facts? No, Eli said. I did both of those things. Then you understand, the officer said, that you are in violation of Concord Customs statute regarding non-interference in registered local kinship law. On a Concord jurisdiction station, a foreign contractor does not override local kinship instruction. That is not a hard rule to follow, contractor. It exists so that 10,000 stations do not each become an argument. He paused. Set the individual down. Station wardens will return her to the place of severing. You will be processed for the violation, fined, and removed from the station at the next outbound. If you comply now, that is the whole of it. Nobody is harmed. Nobody is harmed. He said it standing over a child who was harmed, who was dying of harm, and he did not even hear himself say it, because to him the child was not the thing in the room. To him, the thing in the room was the statute. The statute was the patient. The statute was what he had come down through the dark to save. And I watched Eli Mercer understand that. I have thought a great deal about that moment, about what he understood. Because up to then he had been arguing with Drudd, and Drudd was hard, but Drudd was a person. Drudd believed a terrible thing for a reason she could say out loud. You could grip an argument with Drudd, but the Concord was not a person and did not believe anything and could not be gripped. The Concord was just the shape that order takes when it has stopped asking why. And there is nothing more frightening than that. Nothing in the whole sector more frightening than a polite voice that has stopped asking why, with 6 rifles behind it. A lesser man would have set her down then. It would not even have been cowardice. It would have been sense. One tech bare hands against the Concord. There is no version of that where the tech wins. Everyone in the corridor knew it. The Korlu knew it. Drudd knew it. I saw her shift her weight, ready for it to be over, ready to take the child back and finish what the cold had started. Even old Petrine had let her med kit sag against her chest because what was the point now? Eli Mercer did not set her down. And this is the part that the traitors always lean in for, because they expect a fight. They expect the difficult human to do something mad. And it is so much better than that. He did not fight either. He did something much harder, he thought. He stood there with the rifles on him, and he did the thing his whole difficult species is supposed to be bad at, the thing the calm species sneer at us. No, at them, the humans, I keep saying us. You will forgive an old creature who came to count one of them as kin. He stayed in the room with the fear and he used it. He did not let it move his feet. He let it sharpen his head. And what he said when he finally spoke, he did not say to the officer. He turned his head, just his head, slow, his arms still full, and he said it to the corridor, to the Korlu, to Drudd, to all the watching faces of a people who were not his and who had every reason to want this off-worlder gone. He said, your statute, the non-interference one. He was talking to the officer now but looking at the Korlu. It protects a kinship matter from outside interference, from people like me. That's the whole point of it, right? An outsider doesn't get to override a family's law. Correct, the officer said. So who decides what the family's law is? Eli said. Not me, not you, the family, the kin elder. That's the entire reason your statute exists, because you, the Concord, don't get to decide a local custom either. You just enforce whatever the kin says. He let that sit half a second. So if the kin elder changes her mind, you've got nothing. No interference. No statute. The matter's internal again and it's none of your business. Right. The officer was quiet for a moment. The kin elder has invoked the severing. It cannot be unspoken. That is their law, contractor, not mine. I told you. I only enforce. Right, Eli said. You only enforce. So this isn't your decision at all. And he turned the rest of the way around, child and all, his back fully to 6 rifles, which I will tell you took something I do not have, and he faced old Drudd. It's hers, he said. I want you to picture old Drudd in that moment, because I have known hard creatures and she was the hardest, and I did not think anything would move her. She stood at the head of her kin with her slate hide gone dark and flat, and her old eyes weighing the human the way she weighed everything. The way she had weighed Kessa across 2 winters and found her too light. She had said the word. She had meant the word. She had walked her own out into the dark and walked back and sealed the door, and she had not, I believe, expected to ever stand in a warm corridor and have to look at the consequence of it breathing in a stranger's arms. Eli did not beg her. That is important. He had figured out something about the Korlu, I think, in his 3 days of watching them around the domes, or maybe he just understood it about hard people everywhere. You do not move a hard person by begging. Begging only confirms to them that you are weight, and weight is the whole thing they are afraid of. So he did not beg. He made her an argument in her own terms, the way you would talk to any proud creature about the thing it is most proud of. He said quiet just to her, though the whole corridor heard it. You told me you don't sever to be cruel. You said you do it so nobody has to live as a weight. I believe you, I do. I think you believe that all the way down. He shifted the child's weight against him. But here's the thing I can't get past. You decided she's a weight because she can't pull a load and can't harden in the cold. That's the test. Can she carry? And if she can't, she's weight and weight gets severed. He looked down at the bundle, then back up. I just carried her 200 meters through your long dark with my coat off. My hands aren't going to work right for a week, and I'd do it again right now today with the rifles and all of it. So by your own test, somebody carried her, easily, gladly, That makes her not wait, that makes her carried. You said the cruelty was making her live knowing nobody would carry her. His voice dropped. Somebody will, I just did. The thing you were trying to spare her from, it isn't true. You can stop sparing her from it. The corridor did not breathe. An old Drud, I watched it. I was 10 paces back and I watched her old flat face. Old Drud did a thing I had never seen a Korlu elder do. She looked at the child. Not at the off-worlder, not at the rifles, not at the statue. At Kessa. At the youngling she had walked out into the dark. She looked at her for a long time, the way you look at a thing you had decided not to look at again. And something moved in that hard old face. Something that was not softness exactly. The Korlu do not do softness, but something that was recalculation. Something that was a creature who has spent her whole life doing arithmetic being shown a number she left out. And then Drud spoke, not to Eli, to the Concord officer. In the Korlu tongue first, the formal kin tongue, the words I do not fully have, and then, because the law required it be witnessed in the trade tongue, again so we could all understand. She said, the severing is withdrawn. The one called Kessa is of my kin. The matter is internal. There is nothing here for the Concord. And she said the name. Kessa. You understand, a severed one has no name. To say the name was to take it all back in front of everyone, in front of her own kin, in front of the silver hardshell, an old matriarch admitting, without ever once using a soft word, that her arithmetic had been wrong. I will tell you, I have heard a great many things in 61 cycles at that gate. I never heard anything like the sound of an old hard creature giving a child her name back. The Concord officer stood there a moment longer. I think, and this is only an old gatekeeper guessing, I think some part of him was almost relieved. Because the truth is, 6 rifles in a corridor over a contract tech and a sick child is not order. It is the opposite of order. It is the kind of thing that ends up in a report, that ends up in a hearing, that ends up being somebody's career. The cleanest possible outcome for a creature whose whole self is the avoidance of mess was exactly this. Kinelder withdraws the matter, statute no longer applies, nothing to enforce, nothing happened, go home. The matter is internal, the officer repeated flat, and you could not tell a thing from the helmet, but I swear the shoulders went down half a degree. There is no violation to process. Contractor Mercer. A pause. Complete your contract and depart on schedule. And that was the whole of his goodbye. He turned, and the 6 of them went back down the corridor in that same unhurried way, and the cargo lock cycled, and the breath of the long dark came in one more time and then was sealed out, and the silver hardshell was gone as if it had never come, the way order always wants to be, invisible, untroubled, never having had to bend. But it had bent, we all saw it bend. The peacekeepers had come down through 9 days of night to enforce the law of a frozen moon, and a tired human with bad hands had bent it not by breaking it, but by reading it, all the way down to the bottom, to the one soft place at the very center of the hardest law in the sector, the place where it admitted that the family got to decide. He had not beaten the Concord. He had handed it back its own rule and stepped out of the way. Old Petraine was already moving before the lock finished sealing. She took the child out of his arms right there in the corridor. Gently, the way she takes everything, and she barked at her one assistant to get the warming table and the slower warm lines. Because you do not warm a cold, stilled body fast. You do it slow or you stop the heart. And she had done it a dozen times for shaft crews, and she did it now for Kessa. And the kin. This is the part that gets me, the kin carried the warming gear. Drud's own broad cousins, the 2 who had walked the child out into the dark, carried the warming lines and held the heat frame steady. And if there was shame in their slate faces, well, there should have been, but there was also something else. Something I will call relief, because I do not have a better word. The relief of a people who had been doing a hard thing for so long that they had forgotten it was allowed to come out differently. Eli Mercer sat down in the corridor with his back against the wall. He just sat down. The way you do when the thing is finally out of your arms and your body remembers all at once everything you made it do. His hands were shaking again. I went and sat down next to him, old as I am, down on the cold floor because somebody should, and because he was the first person in 61 cycles to do the thing I had only ever watched through glass, and the least I could do was sit on the floor with him. He did not say anything heroic. He looked at his ruined hands and he said, "I really hope they've got something hot to drink in this place that doesn't strip your stomach." I told him I knew where to find it. I told him to avoid the green bottle. He laughed. It was not much of a laugh, but it was the first laugh I had heard in that corridor, maybe the first laugh on the night side of Coldreach in a long time, and it surprised one or two of the Korlu, who looked over at the strange off-worlder laughing on the floor with the old gatekeeper, and did not know what to make of it, and went back to holding the warming frame steady over the child they had given a name back to. She lived. I should tell you that plainly, because I have made you hold your breath this whole long telling, and it is not right to make you hold it longer. Kessa lived. The slow rewarm worked. Petrine said another quarter hour out there, and it would not have, but it had not been another quarter hour, because a man went out to look at a vent stack. The wasting in her nerves did not go away. Eli did not perform a miracle. That is not the kind of story this is. Her hand never closed right again. Her leg never lost the hitch. She walked with the stick for the rest of the time I knew her, and there were loads on Coldreach she would never pull, and the cold would always find her faster than it found her kin. But here is what I watched happen across the cycles after. It was carried. Not the way Drudd had feared it, not as a shame, not as a weight that crushes whoever is soft enough to bear it. The kin found things she could do. A Korlu who cannot pull or can run the shaft logs, and her hands worked well enough for that, and her quick orange lamp eyes that used to race messages across the outpost were sharp enough to catch a false weight ticket or a miscut load before it cost the foreman a fine, and the foreman started paying her in half tokens again, and then in whole ones. She became, of all things, useful. By the hardest Korlu measure she ceased to be weight. But that was never really the point, and everyone had stopped pretending it was. The point was she was theirs, and they had decided to carry her, and there is no shame in being carried by people who choose it. There is only shame in a world that made them think they could not. Drudd never spoke of the severing again. The Korlu do not. But I noticed, and I am only an old creature who watches, I noticed that old Drudd was the one who taught Kessa the shaft logs. Sat with her, hour on hour, that hard old creature, teaching the youngling she had walked into the dark how to read a load ticket. I do not know what that was. I will not call it apology because the Korlu have no use for the word, and I do not think Drudd had the shape of it in her. But it was something. It was an old hard arithmetic being done over, slowly, by hand, the long way, until it came out different. Eli Mercer fixed the number 2 generator. He recalibrated the dome scrubbers. He found the vent stack choked with a season's worth of ammonia ice, exactly as he had suspected, and he cleared it, which is the actual reason he was out there in the first place, which I sometimes think about, that the whole thing turned on a man being good enough at a dull job to go check a vent stack with his own eyes. He left on schedule on the next outbound hauler because that was his contract, and he was a man who finished his contracts. I logged him out myself. He stopped at my booth to return his chit. We did not say very much. There is not very much to say. He asked me to keep an eye on the youngling, and I said I would, and I did. He shouldered his kit bag and went up the cargo ramp into the cold, and the hauler took him off into the long dark, and I never saw him again. I do not know where he is now. Somewhere out in the Foundry Consortium, I expect, fixing somebody else's generator, being difficult to somebody else's idea of how things have to be. I have kept the gate logs on Coldreach for 61 cycles. I have watched 5 severings through glass, and I will carry the shame of the first 4 for whatever time I have left, because I know now that the door did not have to seal. It only sealed because everyone agreed it had to, including me. The 5th one I did not watch through glass. I sat on a cold floor next to the man who broke it open, And I learned the thing I am going to leave you with, because you have stayed with me this whole long way, and you have earned the end of it. People kept saying it that night. The traders said it, the Korlu said it, even the Concord said it in its flat, polite way. Humans are difficult. They do not let things go. They decide a thing is wrong and they will not accept that it has to be that way. They are difficult. And I used to think that was a fault. I had lived a long time among calm and reasonable peoples who accepted that the cold is cold, and the law is the law, and the moon turns slow, and I thought their calm was wisdom. But I sat on that floor next to Eli Mercer, and I watched a child breathe who was supposed to be dead, and I understood, finally, what difficult is for. The whole galaxy had agreed on a thing, a clean thing, a reasonable thing, a thing with no cruelty in it that anyone would admit to, and one human looked at it and would not agree. That is the whole of it. That is the entire secret of them, and they do not even know it is a secret. They think it is just how anyone would be. Where the rest of us see a law, a human sees a child still looking at them, and once she has looked at you, the human cannot unknow that she is there. So no, they do not let things go. Thank the cold dark for that.